All right. So I'll start. Greetings, everyone. I'm Ishita Shrivastava from Tasveer. If you're new to our channel, Tasveer is an effort to make the reporting, processing, and redressal of cybercrimes of sensitive nature less tedious. Such crimes include revenge porn, upskirting, image-based sexual harassment, cyber flashing, etc. It uses awareness to remove the harassing nature of victims of such crimes and provides them with protective measures against it. For this, it uses podcasts, interviews, and blogs with renowned experts from the field. Today, we welcome Mary Sharpe, CEO of Reward Foundations, and Dr. Darryl Mead, Chair of Rewards Foundation. The Reward Foundation is a pioneering educational charity that looks at the science behind sex and love relationships. The Reward Foundation focuses on internet pornography and its impact on mental and physical health, relationships, attainment, and criminality. We're extremely grateful to have you here, sir and ma'am. Our founder, Nama Bose, thanks you from the side of Tasveer for giving us this opportunity. We have a bunch of questions lined up. With your permission, should we begin with the questions?
Yes, please.
All right. So I'll move on to the first question. Does watching pornography affect the normal sexual behavior expectations of the people?
Yes.
All right. So
I'd like a little bit more elaboration on that.
we need a bit more descriptive answer. So
Yes.
Well, pornography use affects the way people think about other people sexually, because by watching people having real sex on screen, you're learning, you're understanding different ways of being sexual, but it's not the way that our biology necessarily set us up to be. It's sex as entertainment and theatre, and it often includes elements of violence. It rarely includes any negotiation of consent. So it's essentially teaching you things that don't make for a good, loving sexual relationship. So from that point of view, it's starting you down a path, and over time, you will tend to learn more and more unhelpful things for your own relationship and for your ongoing development as a human being.
Now, one of the big challenges is that around the age of puberty, people are naturally interested in sex. Nature wants us to be curious about sex. So we go looking to find out more about it because we want to be good at it. Particularly boys, they want to be great lovers, and girls want to be attractive and to be good lovers too. Whereas in the past, there were social rules around when you connected with somebody, maybe no sex until married or very little touch before that. It meant that people could learn in a very gradual way how to connect with each other. But because of the internet, people can have access to every kind of imaginable and unimaginable forms of sexual activity. And this is at an age when the brain is very malleable, when children are in a period of accelerated learning, because the adolescent brain is a wonderful thing, and it's in a wonderful state of learning how to be an adult. But the type of material that most pornography makes available is not helpful for long-term relationships. It's short-term gratification, and it's also teaching people a range of activities that are generally considered not useful for relationships. Now, if people want a quick high, that's where they can go, but they tend to promote this short-term hookup culture that is more beneficial for young men than it is for young women.
all right, thank you so much. I'll like to move on to the next question. What do you think are the negative impacts of watching pornographic content on a regular basis?
Well, I'll try that first of all. Well, the issue now is whether or not you could develop a compulsive behavior towards it so that it becomes something you cannot stop. In the start of 2022, the World Health Organization made compulsive sexual behavior disorder a recognized disorder. About 80% of the people who are diagnosed with compulsive sexual behavior disorder have a problem controlling their pornography use. So it can genuinely become a health issue. And that is the most fundamental thing, because it's something that builds up over time slowly. And if we think about it, 25 years ago, there was essentially no pornography from the internet anywhere in the world. Now, perhaps as many as 1 billion of the 8 billion people in the world are consuming pornography from the net. But it's something that has become a problem over time. You don't watch pornography for the first time today and have a problem tomorrow. You watch now, you learn, your behavior changes, your brain remolds itself to what it's seeing, then it becomes a health problem. And it can also become a problem in terms of the law, and this desire to see new and unusual and different things can often set you up to go down the path of viewing illegal material or engaging in illegal behaviors because you've seen things like upskirting or secret and hidden cameras, things like this, that if you hadn't been exposed to them, you couldn't then make them part of your normal entertainment, your sexual life, and you wouldn't get into trouble with them.
Now, some of the issues come with this constant novelty at a click. Our brains love novelty. We love learning. We love learning new things. So if you see the same thing over and over, the brain gets bored. It doesn't give you that buzz of excitement around it. But what the internet can do is provide constant novelty. Same with gaming, same with social media, gossip, what the latest celebrities are up to, whatever. There's this constant novelty that keeps bringing us back. And it's specifically designed to do that. And as Darryl has pointed out, this can lead to compulsive use over time. Now, when the excitement is particularly linked to anxiety-making material, so taboo subjects, sex with children or with parents or multiple partners or all kinds of things, then it is shocking to us, but it gives us an adrenaline rush that makes everyday life seem boring by comparison, and makes young people and older people, but particularly young people, want to rush back to it. Now, over time, this can cause, apart from escalation in terms of the amount of time spent looking at and masturbating to it. They're not just looking at porn, they're masturbating to porn. And that interactive element is rewiring the brain in a very unhelpful way. It's making real life sex boring by comparison, because there is no way that a partner can produce as much novelty and kinkiness as artificially developed videos can. And violent porn. Nobody wants to be hit or attacked or whatever, but sadly, there are porn performers who are paid to do that. So it's not genuine consent, it's paid consent. But it means that there's a lack of interest in real sex, or it can lead to that, and less satisfaction from real sex. But it can lead to depression, social anxiety, and all the while it's sexually conditioning the brain to need this higher level of arousal than is available. And a lot of young men are developing sexual dysfunctions related to pornography use. They're just not being aroused by real life sex. And that is one of the most frightening things for young men. And it can lead them to, severe depression, but, in some cases, suicide or suicidal ideation. So it's not a risk-free activity.
All right, thank you so much for such a descriptive answer. All right, moving on to my next question. What are your views on the impact of the technological advancements on pornographic content that is available online?
Well, are these the technological advancements you think, like what's it, virtual reality? Is it virtual reality type thing? And yeah. Well, this is all developing, further addiction. It's keeping the arousal levels high in an abnormal and artificial way. That means that real life sex is boring by comparison. So it's making people more hooked on technology that costs money. This is all being driven by multi-billion-dollar companies and artificial intelligence, who are making a fortune out of this slightly sensitive part of the brain, particularly the adolescent brain, that wants a lot of stimulation. But it means that when you're spending your time and focus on virtual reality or not needing sex with a real person because you're getting all these physical sensations, it means you're not developing the real life benefits of an in-person and an interpersonal relationship.
I'd like to put two other ways of answering your question. Basically, if you have one of these, a smartphone, now you can make professional standard pornography. This phone will create high definition video, record high quality sound, provided you have an internet connection. Any person has the capacity to create pornography. And that has moved, so it's moved from being something created by an industry remotely to an awful lot of porn is now created, whether it's amateur or in reality it's just within a relationship, and the porn that ends up becoming revenge porn is almost exclusively created that way. So the tech has an issue from that point of view. Mary mentioned artificial intelligence, and the big thing that has made pornography sites so successful. Now, the top 4 pornography sites in the world have over 370 million visitors per day, every day. So that's more than the population of the US per day, or a third of the population roughly of India go to a porn site every day. Just the top 4. There are other porn sites. There's several million more out there, but most of them don't get so much traffic. But what's made the success of the big ones is they use artificial intelligence to profile the information they have from you. So most people don't use a VPN. They don't hide their identity. They don't hide where they are. So the pornography websites are trying to work with their business model. Their business model is very simple. Eyeballs on screen. The longer you watch for, the more value you are providing, because mainly they are making their money by selling the information about you and linking that information up with what information they're getting from other social media feeds or whatever to sell to advertisers, ultimately to advertise to you. Only 1% of pornography users pay money for the pornography. 99% do it for free, but the 99% are still providing value. Otherwise, the internet, a third of the electricity used on the internet for streaming video worldwide is used by pornography. More electricity goes on porn than goes, say, on Netflix, which is a sort of a worldwide brand, or on Amazon. So someone's paying a lot of money to give away the free product to make the profit and to still make it work. Now, artificial intelligence is now used to maximize the time your eyeballs will stay on the screen, making the sites what you call sticky. So you'll go there, then you'll come back again and again, and you'll spend longer and longer. And they do that mainly by introducing elements Mary referred to of surprise, novelty, shock. So most people will find some violent content on the front page of any of the major porn sites they go to. And if you view any of that content, the AI will then know your IP address and will give you more of that over time. And you'll be groomed by the artificial intelligence to want more shocking material, because that's what works. It's a long answer, but that's the business model, and that's what the individual consumer is up against. And the individual consumer has no idea that any of this is going on. They see sex on the screen, it's amazing, they get off on that, and they're not thinking about what's being done to them.
There's something about human nature that is fascinated by negative stuff, so like cruelty or violence. And I was just listening to a program on the BBC this morning about the success of Grand Theft Auto, the game. And they I think they got 1 billion sales within the first 3 days of the last version, and they're hoping to bring out a new version of it. And they discovered that people are more fascinated by violence. Well, of course, the same applies to pornography. People are fascinated by violence. And sadly, it's mainly violence against women. So it's women and children who are the biggest losers with this form of entertainment.
All right, so many new information about this. I got to know so much just by like the phones we use and everything. All right, I'll move on to the next question. In the manifesto for the European Research Network into problematic usage of the internet, with the diverse need of the professional and consumer communities affected by problematic usage of pornography, you are talking about national as well as international users. Who do you think are the major stakeholders and why?
Which sort of stakeholders are you thinking of in terms of a government, of pornography suppliers, consumers? Can you unpack?
Basically, sir, altogether, you're talking about the national and international users. So, who do you think are the major stakeholders in this? Like, if we join the government or the consumers, who do you think comes as a major stakeholder?
They have different holdings or different stakes. You know, obviously at a consumer level, it's, you know, highly stimulating, and everyday life is hard work. Just surviving is hard work for most people in any country, whether you're a rich developed country or you're a developing country. You know, life is a challenge. So if you can get a thrill or something exciting, then that's good. And so, or on the face of it, it's good. So obviously consumers see lots of benefits to free pornography, or even paying for pornography or the like. The big consumer, I mean, governments have a major stake in protecting their population. Their first duty, any government's first duty, is to protecting its population. But what they're failing to see is that they have to curb the power of the tech companies. And this is a major problem for governments around the world, because they want to encourage tech companies, and India is as much, you know, involved in this as anywhere else. That there's the tech companies, you know, bring a lot of money and industry and employment to countries, and therefore governments are reluctant to undermine them or limit them in any way. But there is a conflict between getting revenues, and these companies often don't pay the amount of tax they're supposed to. They use the international tax system to minimize the amount of tax they pay that would actually benefit, you know, governments. And governments are absolutely not doing enough to protect their people with things like age verification legislation. So there is definitely a conflict at various levels, but there are various stakeholders. Then again, you've also got, there's a whole other area. I don't know if you want to touch on it with this particular question, but these multi-billion-dollar industries use what's called the playbook. Now, this is a deliberate strategy to cause confusion and doubt in the mind of the public and of stakeholders, particularly decision makers, about the potential harm that their product can cause. So back in the 50s, when evidence started emerging that smoking could cause lung cancer, the big tobacco companies knew that they had to do something, otherwise their profits would disappear. So they created a whole alternative research industry that took people's attention in other directions away from tobacco, saying it was underlying issues, it was, you know, environmental issues, it was everything except tobacco. And they paid scientists to tell decision makers, to tell media companies, the television, newspaper journalists, that there was no connection between smoking and lung cancer. And they created doubt in the mind of the public. It's a bit like a law. Think of a criminal law court, where the job of the defense is to create doubt in the mind of the jury that that person has committed that crime. Well, this is the same approach that is used by these big companies. They create doubt in the mind of the public that their product causes that harm. And they're very successful at it. Now, all these big companies are using the playbook that was developed in the 50s and 60s by a company called Hill and Knowlton for big tobacco. So the porn industry does the same. They have paid psychologists, sexologists, who are constantly writing articles or appearing on television and saying, no problem here. There's no such thing as porn addiction. They tell lies. And I don't use that term lightly, but they lie about the research. They create doubt about the impact of this so that the public and also members of parliament and decision makers are confused. They have doubt about whether there is a link between pornography or gaming or gambling and the harm that it is causing the public. So this means that then there is a slowing down by parliamentarians of producing legislation that will protect the public. So age verification doesn't happen. In Britain, we've been waiting, 8 years already for it, and it's still not happening. And it looks like it's going to be kicked further down the road for at least another 3 or 4 years.
I'd like to go again some different sorts of angles on answering the question about the national and international focus, and to think about pornography as an industry and who's involved. Well, first of all, it is an industry that has, it's very international. While people actually want to see people like them having sex, and if you look at the statistics available from Pornhub, everywhere in the world, local is what the content that people want. But the reality is that these companies are supplying pornography across international borders, in most cases with no restrictions. As far as we can tell, there are no countries in the world who have 3G or better, mostly 4G telephone networks who don't also have now a large population of people using pornography as consumers. So there's the question of who owns the pornography companies. And unlike, say, tobacco or petroleum or the other big polluters that we know about, the ones that can have effect, these are publicly listed companies with big capital. In reality, almost all of the main pornography suppliers are privately owned. They are multinationals, but they are usually registered in very low regulation jurisdictions. The internet and internet porn are relatively new, so the law hasn't caught up. There's not good regulation in any country in the world. Like, no country in the world yet has age regulation for, or age verification for porn, whereas we do for guns, for blades, for solvents, for tobacco, for various sorts of substances, whatever. So the laws are behind. The private companies who do the pornography and run the business tend to be living very much in the shadows. We believe that there is a significant element of organised crime involved in production. And certainly there's a lot of evidence that human trafficking supplies a lot of the people who perform in pornography. So there's clearly an organised crime element there. Then there's the actual supply side of things. The like telephone companies worldwide are benefiting from selling bandwidth, minutes, whatever, gigabytes of data for you to watch porn. So that's a way of getting you to use their product. And porn is very good from that point of view. Porn is almost exclusively video. That means it's broad bandwidth. and using up your consumer time. So it's a profitable product. The fact that they sell advertising information is clearly a way things to help. The search companies, Google, Yahoo, Bing, whatever, if you search for anything vaguely porny or sexy, they will supply you with information unless you've got the filters turned right up, and most people don't do that. There's the actual amount of money involved in supplying and creating pornography is very small because it's an almost perfect product. A lot of pornography is actually made for people by free. Amateur porn, some of it's real amateur porn, some of it's created commercially to look like it's amateur. But the actual production, like if you want to sell cocaine, you've got to grow it somewhere, trip it across borders, you'll lose a lot of it on the way, it's illegal everywhere. Pornography doesn't have hardly any production costs. The distribution costs are extremely low. So there's lots and lots of things that are helping.
All right, sir. I'll move on to the next question. Is pornography in itself an act of violence against women, or does it encourage such gender-based violence because of the brutality being displayed on the screen?
Well, it depends on your point of view. You know, if you're a woman, you probably think it's violence against women because, you know, so much of it has coercive sex involved. And what people are seeing are, as I mentioned before, paid performers who are doing acts that are exciting to look at, but it's more for the male gaze. So a traditional radical feminist approach, the old style feminists used to say that it was objectification of women for the male gaze and for male pleasure. It, you know, wasn't for women. On the other hand, there are quite a lot of women enjoy pornography and look at it and like it, and even like the more adventurous, the more extreme forms of pornography. But there are some people like that because, you know, people exist on a spectrum of what's interesting and attractive to them. So yes, for some people, it's that. One of the challenges today, talking about feminism, is that liberal feminists, the sort of more modern feminists, say that pornography is empowering, that, you know, you can have sex like a man. Well, men and women have a different approach to sex. Biology makes us want to have a different approach to sex. Women are much more about quality of partner, because if they have sex, they're investing the potential of 9 months of their life in producing a baby and several years after that in bringing a child up. Whereas a man invests a few seconds to inseminate a partner and then can wander off to inseminate the next partner. So quantity versus quality. So men and women have very different approaches to, from a biological, an evolutionary biological approach to what sex is. And what pornography is doing today, and what a lot of liberal feminists are saying, is that we can have sex like men and it doesn't matter. Well, they're wrong, because from a biological perspective, there are differences between men and women. And the type of sex that is being portrayed in pornography is harmful to women. It's harmful to women psychologically, and it can be damaging to them physically, because so much of it is about multiple partnered sex, sex with lots of different partners. We have seen a huge rise in sexually transmitted diseases. We've seen a huge rise in mental health disorders amongst women and men. And a lot of that might be related to the hookup culture, which is also being driven to a large extent by what people are seeing in pornography, that it's cool to have lots of partners at the one time, as well as, one after the other. But that means that the benefits, the psychological and physical benefits that you get from being in a long-term, loving, trusting relationship is not happening. So it depends on your perspective. Not everybody's going to become hooked on pornography, but a lot of people are. But it's these wider implications that are not being fully taken on board, I would say, by this liberal feminist approach. Not that we want to go back to the old approach, where sex should be repressed or that women shouldn't have a say in matters. It's not about going back in time, but it's about more equality, genuine equality between men and women in how they engage with each other in a sexual way.
All right, ma'am. We have a follow-up question related to this. Um, do you think violent pornography increases acceptance of aggression against women? Does it normalize violence against women, both considering sexual as well as non-sexual?
Yes, certainly sexual violence. Whether it increases other kinds of violence, I don't know. I don't know the research in that. I think what the little I've read about it is, it suggests that if people have a propensity already towards violence, then watching sexual violence might exacerbate that innate tendency, or tendency that has been developed maybe because of trauma in the childhood. But even without trauma in one's childhood, watching violent porn, what we're seeing, there's research that's talking about the development of psychopathic tendencies, dark triad. There's like 3 personality types or traits that seem to be becoming more prevalent in young men today, that seems to be linked to pornography use. And that when men quit porn, we're seeing this on the porn recovery websites like nofap.com and rebootnation.org, that over time when men quit porn, their compassion for women comes back. So they stop a piece of meat that just needs to be beaten into submission. Their actual compassion for women comes back, and they're much more loving, they're much more chivalrous, and much better partners as a result.
All right.
Well, there are probably 2 issues here. There are people who have a normal or a natural tendency towards violence, and that might be in their genetic makeup. It might be because they suffered trauma in childhood that has predisposed them more towards aggressive behavior. And what we know from the research is that that is likely to be exacerbated by an addiction. Probably any kind of addiction is going to make it worse, because what addiction tends to do is make people more impulsive and unable to put the brakes on impulsive behavior. And that happens with pornography too. But if somebody's looking at pornography, whether or not they have a I'll say that again. Whether or not someone has a predisposition genetically or because of events in childhood towards aggression, then looking at a lot of violent material, particularly at that critical time of adolescent development, it means that they're developing a sexual arousal template, is what psychologists call it, that make them want high levels of arousal from violence. So they need the violence to get the high. And then but also there's the sexual script aspect, that if they're used to seeing violence in sexual acts from all the hundreds and thousands of hours of pornography they've been watching, then their expectation is that's what good sex is. And it's also grooming young women into thinking that's what good sex is. Even if it's painful and miserable, they're going for it. For instance, there was research from 2014 about anal sex amongst adolescents. Now, boys see it as that's what you do. It's a normal part of sexual activity because they've seen it in pornography. And even although they know that it causes pain to women and women don't like it, even sometimes the young men don't like it, they think they have to do it because they've seen it in porn. And young men often want to be showing off to their friends. And they talk about earning brown wings. So doing anal sex, even on a first so-called date, or sexual encounter, is a big deal for them. So there is this issue that even if the girls don't like it, the boys don't like it, they're doing it because they've seen it in porn. So there's no doubt that the sexual scripts young people are developing is being very much influenced by the violent porn they're seeing. But the good news is that when people quit porn, and we know this from the thousands and thousands of people on the porn recovery websites like nofap.com or rebootnation.org, that their compassion for women comes back. Men start having a more sensitive reaction to women. They're attracted to them again, and they don't want to harm them. They don't want to inflict pain. They become chivalrous, and they become loving, and they become good partners. And that's what men and women want. And they have a better chance of actually having decent relationships. So we've seen really positive outcomes from the guys who are willing to experiment with quitting porn.
All right, so we have a question related to some legal aspect. Is pornography a speech? And should pornography on internet be regulated? And if banning pornography in any way hindering the right to free speech?
It depends what country you're in, how is regarded as free speech or not. In the United States, the First Amendment, the porn companies have relied on case law that suggests that it's free speech and you can't interfere with it. But there's no pushback against that. Do you want to say anything about that at the moment? In the UK, I would say that I don't know if it's really related, but the sexual strangulation and sexual violence, some people say that, well, the Domestic Violence Act has said that you can't use rough sex as a defense or consent to rough sex. I don't know if that's really the free speech aspect, but it relates to consent. And one of the biggest problems around this whole area of pornography and sexual violence is the issue of consent, because it's very easy to coerce someone into believing that consent has been achieved when it absolutely hasn't been. So I don't know if you want to go into the area of consent at this point, or you want to stick more strictly to free speech, perhaps in the American sense of it.
Whatever, like it can be the free speech. Basically, we are asking that if we ban pornography, will it in some way hinder with the free speech or expressing opinions of people?
Well, yes, if you could ban pornography and make it effective, there are certainly elements on the edges of speech where it could be a problem. Things like for an artist who wants to communicate about sexuality and to use sexual content within art, yes, but we would need a very nuanced law to make it effective. The reality is that there is negligible, genuine speech, free speech content in almost all pornography. So it's being used as a smokescreen by the industry as an excuse and a way of working. There is a question of whether you can ban it. I waved my telephone around earlier, and the reality is once you have smartphones in circulation, and we now have at least 3 billion of them on the planet, the idea of banning pornography, because it can be made infinitely and be made available through so many channels, I think is not something that is feasible. No country in the world currently that we know of has an effective regime banning pornography. Even very repressive regimes like we see in Iran, where for religious reasons pornography is completely illegal, or in North Korea, where you would expect the government to be controlling the internet, which it does in a massive way, pornography is still freely available. It's available on the net in North Korea. It also comes over the border from China. Within Iran, it is not available on the internet. So people use memory sticks or people use satellite television. So when we've interviewed people who have been teens growing up in Iran in the last 15, 20 years, and they said there was loads of porn available all the time, even though in theory it was completely banned and totally unavailable. So the concept of banning doesn't work, and I don't think that that's effective. What can work is age verification, because you can use the IP address to create an understanding of where someone is in the world, and at least most children will be able to be kept off the net. But adults can almost always say, we'll use a virtual private network, we'll check on what country we're in, and you can go around the problem. But in reality, you can't. Banning is not a real option. Not if you want the ban to truly work as a law and not be a laughingstock. And India's attempts to ban porn have not been very nice to watch. It's just gone badly wrong very quickly.
I want to talk a little bit about consent, because in normal legal work, where rape or sexual assault is concerned, the big concern is always, was there consent? And the most difficult cases to prosecute are where the couple have known each other and maybe had a sexual relationship. If it's somebody, walking across a park and they're attacked by a stranger, that's a lot easier to understand in terms of consent. But when the parties know each other, it's a lot more difficult. Now, where pornography comes in, where that comes into play is, as I've mentioned, there's been a shift in our culture, particularly in the past 10 years, because people who are using porn need more arousing material. Then over time, people want harder sex. And it's women are asking for hard sex as much as the guys are pushing for it. It's not a one-way shop or a one-way street. So, because if your brain desensitizes to levels of stimulation, so it needs more stimulation, and that can mean harder sex. And it's where also the sexual strangulation and choking comes in. So BDSM practices, bondage, domination, sadomasochism. Films like 50 Shades of Grey and books have promoted that and made it look cool and so forth. But in fact, it's violence, it's sexual violence and so-called consensual violence. Now, what people don't realize is that even if they say, yes, I want a bigger sexual high, squeeze tighter and tighter, what they don't realize often is that the health impact of that can lead to stroke or death. So it's not just that their air passages are being blocked for maybe a minute or longer, which has an impact on the brain. But recent research has shown that the second biggest cause of stroke in women, and that can leave you paralyzed down one side, it can even lead to death. But the second biggest cause of stroke in women under the age of 42 is sexual strangulation. And that's the young people. It's not happening in the older age group. It's the younger people who have been much more exposed to pornography. Now, when you take that into a courtroom and somebody has died, and it's usually the woman, and the guy says, well, she consented to it. She asked me to strangle her. She asked me to choke her and, squeeze tighter. So she consented to rough sex. Now, the law in the UK is that you cannot consent to your own death and you cannot consent to your own harm. But the challenge is that people don't know this is causing harm. They just think of the short-term gratification of a bigger sexual high. And that's one of the challenges, because people in what's called the kink community or the BDSM community say, I have the right to do what I want. If I want, adventurous sex, then I know how to protect myself. I just use a safety word or a safety gesture, and then that's okay. Now, more sexually adventurous people, that's their prerogative if they want to go down that. But our view is that they are not giving informed consent, because they are not aware of the physical harms that may result from that, nor the legal implications, the legal risks that are caused to them and particularly to their partner who's carrying it out. And sexual strangulation is very mainstream. Intimate partner violence is very mainstream in pornography, and it's one of the fastest growing areas of the criminal law. So this whole issue around consent is deeply problematic, and so much of it has been driven by pornography. So for the libertarians to say freedom of speech, we can do what we want, we can do that. We say that there needs to be an awful lot more education around it, particularly for children. It's one thing for adults if they want to be sexually adventurous and engage in BDSM practices with their safety words and the like. But children are accessing pornography at an increasingly young age. Some research from Poland showed recently that children aged between 7 and 12 are watching porn. 25% are watching porn at least once a month. Now that's, from a very young, so they're learning about this, they're watching this, they're acting it out, and therefore we're seeing a huge rise, not surprisingly, in child-on-child sexual abuse, because they're practicing these without understanding the health and the legal risks around them.
All right, so I'll just move on to my last question. So, finally, do you think criminalizing pornography is an option or regulation of the content could be enough to deal with the menace?
The issue of legalization is again challenging, because I think the best approach is definitely age verification. You've got to protect children. Absolutely. Children should not have easy access to pornography. They shouldn't have access to pornography at all. Their brains are too young and they're still developing, and it is too problematic for children to have easy access to that. Children do not need to watch pornography. There is no benefit to them of watching pornography. It's artificial, and a lot of it is real violence. So there's no benefit to them. Teaching them about healthy sexual relationships and safe intimacy, that's a different matter. And we certainly promote that. Teaching healthcare professionals about the risks around pornography is hugely important. We have developed an online course for doctors and other healthcare professionals to make them aware of the risks, the health risks, mental and physical health risks around pornography. We've been accredited by the Royal College of General Practitioners for the past 5 years, teaching in-person courses. We're now putting the course online. We have free lesson plans for schools. They could be used in India, that teach children about pornography, about the legal issues, about the health issues, about the adolescent brain, what pornography does, and how does it compare a pornified relationship versus a healthy, intimate relationship? How do you develop a trusting one? So we've been developing materials. We've got a parent's guide, a free parent's guide, to help educate parents around this, because parents are at a loss to know what to do. But we definitely think that the age verification legislation should be the #1 priority for any government anywhere in the world. And it would be wonderful if India took up this piece of legislation and promoted it.
All right, so I see a book behind you. Can you just tell something about it?
Sure. Well, this is the book called Your Brain on Porn, Internet Pornography and the Emerging Science of Addiction. And you can see there's a hook in the brain. And this is by our colleague, Gary Wilson. And very sadly, he died last year. But he produced this amazing book that came out of a TEDx talk, which has had over 15 million views. It was called The Great Porn Experiment from 2012. But he was a science teacher, and he explained the impact of pornography on the brain in a very accessible way. So the TED talk was popular, as I said, but then he produced this book with lots of the research explained in a really easy way, and hundreds of recovery stories from young men and women who have been hooked on porn and how they've managed to get rid of that and get their life back in order. So it's been translated into 7 languages already, and we would love to see it in Hindi and other languages. And it's available as an audio book. Sometimes people don't like to carry around a paperback that says pornography on it, but it's available as a Kindle and in other formats as well. So it's a bestseller in its category on Amazon, but it's a really brilliant book, and it's got lots of humor in it. So it's not, talking down or, finger wagging, but young men and women in particular have found it really beneficial to help them understand how pornography is affecting them, and what they can do about it if they have an issue with it. Not everybody has an issue with pornography, but some people are more vulnerable than others. And I would say that in our experience, people perhaps who are autistic have a greater propensity to using online materials, whether it's pornography or gaming, because they have more difficulty sometimes in socializing, and so pornography can be a problem for them. But it's it's other people, but it can have challenges with it. It also explains how the porn industry is hoodwinking people and how they're using this playbook to basically deny the science and to defame people like Gary Wilson and others who are trying to help people who have been snared by pornography. So it's a wonderful book. We really recommend it.
It does sound like a wonderful book, and I'd love to read it someday. Thank you so much. We'll end the session here, and thank you so much for such descriptive and informative answers to our viewers as well as us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rashida.